until it fuses into that space. So clinically, this becomes important if there are peritoneal abscesses and infections. This is going to limit the drainage of how far that pus can flow versus out in the greater omental cavity. Right? So we'll have the cadaver out either Thursday or Tuesday in the next couple of weeks, and so you can see some of these structures on the cadaver. Here the stomach is gone. You can see that the pancreas is retroperitoneal, and when we get to the small intestine, the very first part of the small intestine is also retroperitoneal. It's a secondary structure. It's been fused to the back of all of our blood vessels, by the way, the aorta, the renal arteries, those are also all retroperitoneal, and the superior and inferior mesenteric are within the mesenteric. But all of these are going to be posterior to that. Okay. Take a picture if you need to of what's on the board because I'm going to erase it. And we're going to look at blood supply to the stomach. Most of these are review, but there's a few new ones that are branches of the blood vessels that we went over when we did the cardiovascular system. So we're not going to add anything really to the venous system, but we have a few blood vessels to add to our arterial system. So let's draw in the liver. The first part of the small intestine is the duodenum, or you may pronounce it duodenum. I don't really care which you wish to do. It becomes a jejunum as soon as it makes that right angle bend. So we have, after we have our inferior phrenic arteries, remember we have the short trunk that gives off 3 branches, which is the celiac trunk. I'm going to move this in a little bit further here. And the 3 branches, you guys have already gone over this. We have, coming along the inner curvature, lesser curvature of the stomach, we have the left gastric artery. The next branch is going to go behind the stomach, over to the far left to get to the spleen. You're already familiar with this one. That would be this one here, shown behind the stomach. we have left gastric artery, splenic artery, and then going to the liver, we have the hepatic artery. And that's the way we left it, all right? However, the hepatic artery has two branches that we didn't really describe. Coming down off of the hepatic artery and then going behind the duodenum and supplying the duodenum and the pancreas. We have in the lower portion of the stomach, we have another artery. I'll come back and talk about it in just a moment. I'll just kind of show it coming off here. And then we have the right gastric coming in here. So let's go back and label. So this would be a new one. After all the other vessels come off, this is now called the hepatic proper or proper hepatic artery. Before they come off, it's known as the common hepatic. So hepatic proper or proper hepatic. So those are new ones. Now, coming off of the splenic and covering this mound of stomach here, we have a few short vessels known as the short gastric artery. Also coming off of the splenic, we have a vessel that comes down the greater curvature, kind of right within the beginning of the greater omentum, and supplying the stomach here. This has a couple of different names, gastroomental or gastroduodenal. It's in the omentum, gastroduodenal, gastroepiploic. I'm going to call it gastroomental. Sometimes they call it gastroepiploic, but it's in the omentum, so that's easier to remember. So coming from the left side, rather, not right. We have the right gastric coming off of the hepatic. The right gastric joins the left gastric to form this vessel. Two vessels joined together and found on the inner curvature of the stomach. So that's what we see right here. This would be that anatomical position. So here would be the left gastric, here's the right gastric, and they form one single vessel. Okay. Then on the greater curvature, we have the gastroomental. So the left one is coming from the splenic, it's also forming these short gastrics, and comes down the side. That would be this one here. You see it coming from the splenic. And coming from the hepatic, off of the gastroduodenal, we get our right one. So let's draw the gastroduodenal in here. It goes to the stomach and to the duodenum and pancreas. So right gastric and gastroduodenal are the two branches off the hepatic artery. As soon as we're done with right gastric, it becomes a hepatic proper. We have celiac trunk, common hepatic, we give off the gastroduodenal, and then we give off the right gastric. Okay. We have the splenic. From that, we get the short gastric and the left gastro-omental. No new branches off the left gastric. Finally, completing our gastro-omental, we have a branch off the gastro-duodenal. And that's our our right gastro-duodenal.
Oh, it's not over there.
I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Thank you.
I just was wondering.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so we complete the lesser curvature by adding the right gastric to join the left gastric. Then we take the gastro-duodenal, and off of that we get the gastro-omental, joining the gastro-omental from the spleen. So there's a diagram of this in the study material in your lab.
So the short gastric artery is those three coming off?
Well, there's multiple ones, but they just come onto the surface right up here.
Okay, so all of them together are short.
Right. And there are branches off of the splenic. All right, so take a picture of that if you wish. Same image is shown here again. Left gastric, right gastric, splenic giving off the short gastrics, and the left gastro-omental, left gastric-omental, gastro-duodenal giving off the right gastro-omental. So the spleen gives branches to the pancreas, the gastro-omental gives branches to the pancreas. So I don't want to complicate the diagram by drawing it in, but remember the next single vessel off of our aorta is the superior mesenteric artery. That comes off the aorta behind the stomach and then comes in front of the duodenum. So it passes between the stomach and duodenum and comes over the duodenum. I've shown a bit of a space there, actually curves a bit more. So superior mesenteric doesn't have, here you can see the superior mesenteric coming over the small intestine, the duodenum of the small intestine. It doesn't have any new branches on it that we didn't already describe. So it's supplying the small intestine and the ascending colon and transverse colon. One thing that's interesting, you'll see this when I bring comments out, is notice the change in the appearance of the branches from the small intestine, from the superior mesenteric to the small intestine. I don't know why. We certainly have more need for absorption from the distal end of the small intestine. By then we've digested the food and we're spending our blood supply absorbing it. But you'll notice that these branches out from the superior mesenteric artery have just one arcade vessel, maybe a couple here. And then as soon as we get to, so the small intestine is divided into duodenum, that's this short portion here, jejunum, which is around 9 feet, and ileum, which is around 10 feet. The ileum has the multiple arcades. The jejunum has just one or at most two. And so it's a way of being able to tell gross anatomically, otherwise you need the microscope to tell the difference between those regions of the jejunum versus the ileum. The woman that did our paintings here did the dissection. It took her several weeks of dissection on these vessels to demonstrate those arcades because they're within the mesentery and you can't really see them. So she spent a lot of time dissecting that out. So again, here we have all the intestine intact. You can see the superior mesenteric with the branches that are going through the mesenteric proper to the small intestine. And then the rest are going to the colon. Here is our inferior mesenteric. And we talked about the left colic branch and the superior rectal. So no addition to what we already covered for inferior mesenteric. So that's showing those two components. And they meet at the transition from transverse colon to descending colon. Remember what else changes at the transition from transverse colon to descending colon, besides our blood supply?
Nerves?
Nerves. So the vagus nerve stops approximately at the same place where superior mesenteric artery stops, and the descending colon is supplied by inferior mesenteric and primarily by our pelvic flanks, as far as autonomic nerves are concerned. All right, venous drainage, again, nothing new here. All right, we're keeping the same. Remember, we had the portal vein travels with the hepatic artery. So the portal vein is about the size of your thumb, maybe a little bit larger. The hepatic artery is going to be on its anterior surface, and we will add to it the common bile duct. So again, access to that peritoneal space behind the stomach is gained. If I could stick a couple fingers behind that, I would be in that peritoneal space between the pancreas and the stomach. So the portal vein is formed by the union of the splenic vein, and which you can't see here, but coming from the posterior aspect, and superior mesenteric vein. So those are removed in the next image, partially. So here's superior mesenteric, and we'll talk about portal system when we get to the liver. But remember, this is a portal system with two capillary beds again. Capillary bed in the digestive organs and a capillary bed in the liver for absorbing nutrients and delivering them to the liver without having to go completely through the systemic circuit. So we have superior mesenteric in our mesentery proper, joining with the splenic to form portal, there's hepatic artery coming in, and then inferior mesenteric is going to drain directly to splenic. Okay, so nothing new there. So the only new structures we're adding are the branches of the celiac trunk vessels. Short gastric, right, left gastrolingual, and right gastric, and gastroduodenal. All right. Now let's switch to a general view of the histology. So as we go through the digestive tract, we're going to pay attention primarily to the epithelium arrangement that lines each of these organs. It's not complicated as far as the epithelium itself. Only two epithelia line the digestive organs. We start out with non-pornified stratified squamous of the mouth and esophagus. We switch to simple columnar in the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the rectum. And then the anal canal is back to non-pornified stratified squamous again. So that epithelial component is not very difficult or complicated, but whether we have intestinal glands or villi or gastric pits and so on will change to organ. But the actual epithelium does not. So histology plan of the digestive tract is also known as general plan of the alimentary tract. Alimentary is another term for digestive. So I just shorten it to GPAT. And in this model happens to be from the small intestine. But the four layers we're going to talk about are described based on the small intestine as being the model, if you will, and then we make changes when we talk about the mouth and we talk about the large intestine. So there are four layers. I'm going to go through them with you, but I'll show you on the model first. The food would come in contact with the innermost lining, and that's the mucosa. So we've described mucosal membranes, and this is the mucosa, which is a mucosal membrane. That's going to have the epithelium. Then deep to that, kind of like the reticular layer of the skin, the dermis of the skin, we would have the submucosa. Makes sense, sub means below the mucosa. Then we have the muscularis externa, which is primarily 2 layers of smooth muscle. We have skeletal muscle, obviously, in the mouth and much of the esophagus. We lose a lot of our outer layer when we get to the colon, but essentially we have an inner circular and an outer longitudinal layer that allows us the peristalsis that occurs. And then finally, the outermost layer is a simple squamous serous membrane, known as the serosa, but also we just described it earlier this morning as the visceral peritoneum. So that serous membrane attached to any of our digestive organs is the visceral peritoneum, but as part of our histology layer, it's also known as the serosa. So again, we're looking at the small intestine. Here would be the mucosa right here, which is the epithelium plus its underlying loose irregular connective tissue. Then we get to dense irregular connective tissue, and that's the submucosa. Our layers of muscle, the muscularis externa, and then finally our visceral peritoneum or serosa. Doing the same thing. And this is what I just showed you on the model. So here's our epithelia with loose irregular connective tissue, and that is the mucosa. This is the submucosa in the small intestine. It happens to be thrown into folds, muscularis externa, and serosa. So we're going to go over each of these each time we talk about an organ, paying attention to any of the modifications. I just want to give you a basic outline of what we have. So GPAT stands for General Plan. It's a histology plan. Of the alimentary tract. Not elementary, alimentary. So we start out with, and I'm on page 8 if you're trying to follow along in the lectures. With the mucosa. The epithelium is only of 2 types. So it's going to be non-cornified, unless you're a cow, or non-keratinized, if you know that term better, stratified squamous, or simple columnar. Are these simple columnar cells going to have cilia or microvilli?
Microvilli.
Microvilli. Remember the cilia are motile. That's what we had in the respiratory tract when we need to move the mucus. We do have mucus in the digestive tract, but we're not trying to move it. All right? So here we're trying to increase surface area. So we have microvilli. Some of the columnar cells will have most of the columnar cells, starting from the small intestine. So from small intestine to colon, essentially to rectum. There will also be goblet cells present. We do have mucus secreting cells, as you'll see when we get to the stomach, but they're not goblet cells. Then we have, obviously, a connective tissue underneath every epithelium. It's not going to work here. Straight black. We have connective tissue. And this is always loose irregular. Another name for this loose irregular connective tissue, the term was also used in the respiratory system, but I didn't really bring it up. Is lamina propria. So that's just another term for the loose irregular connective tissue in our model. The epithelium would be these pink cells. Ouch. These pink cells, and the gray area would be the loose irregular connective tissue or the lamina propria. Then, in much of the digestive tract, not all of it, okay, not in the mouth, not where we have skeletal muscle, but in much of it, we have a layer of smooth muscle, 1 to 2 cells of smooth muscle, known as the muscularis. Mucosa. It's the deepest part of the mucosa. It often contracts and throws the mucosa into folds, and that would be this pink layer that you see right here. All right. So we'd have the epithelium, the lamina propria, the loose irregular connective tissue, and the muscularis mucosa. That's always smooth muscle. In the esophagus, we start out with skeletal muscle, and then we gradually transition to smooth muscle. So where we have only skeletal muscle, you won't have a muscularis mucosa. But as we start to pick up smooth muscle, we have an area that's mixed, and we have both smooth and skeletal. You'll also start to see the muscularis mucosa. So on this cross-section through the small intestine, that's shown as this pink line right here. Okay, then we have the submucosa. And this is a dense, irregular connective tissue. Like I said, like the reticular layer of the dermis of our skin, it binds the mucosa to the underlying muscle. We do have a few modifications. Right? So we have submucosal glands that secrete mucus. Again, they're not goblet cells. But here on the side, this grayish blue area is showing submucosal glands. This secretes a mucus, increased mucus, more than the goblet cells will secrete onto the surface of the first part of the small intestine. Why do you think we need that extra mucus in the first part of the small intestine?
Stomach acid?
It's an extra protection from the stomach acid. We also have it in the very last portion of the esophagus. So here's the last portion of the esophagus. We have submucosal glands in that last 2 or 3 inches. Again, to protect from stomach acid splashing up into the esophagus as the sphincter opens and you swallow food. So we have specializations, submucosal glands. And in the last part of the esophagus, first part of the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine and the duodenum. And then another specialization of the submucosa that we've already talked about are the Peyer's patches, the lymphatic follicles, and the ileum. Can I erase those 2 layers? Because if I write lower, the students in the back won't be able to see. So I'll give you a moment to finish copying that. muscularis externa is typically smooth muscle, but